everyone. Welcome to our first summer reading program. Today we're going to be making a bee house for mason bees that's going to look a little something like this. Your kit should have included your bottle and paper. You should have gotten a dowel and some air dry clay, so don't open this yet. And you should have also gotten a seed packet. And I'll be sharing some information about these items and about mason bees as we go along. There are a few items you need on hand that weren't included in your kit. Some kind of glue. I'm going to use the liquid Elmer's glue. A pair of scissors. I also like having a paper towel because it gets just a little bit messy, and a mat for the same reason. I have an art mat, but you could use a piece of wax paper, a piece of aluminum foil, cardboard, anything, just so you don't get glue. And then I'm also going to show you a step that you can do if you want with, you could use markers, colored pencils, watercolors. I probably would not use crayons just because of the smell of the wax on them. But we'll get to that in a little bit. Just to let you know, why did we choose for Tails and Tales to do a bee activity? Nearly 80% of our crops depend on animals that partake in pollination. And losing these pollinators causes a problem not only with the availability of food, but also the cost. So we've got rising prices on fresh vegetables, fruits, and even the canned, because they still, again, are grown as a crop. So the effect to the pollinators really affects those things. 2014, there was a beehive loss of 42% of beehives, not just mason bees, but just beehives in general. And in 2020, it was 44% of the beehives were lost that were out there. And some of these are various ways, things like pesticides. There's even stories of people transporting beehives from different orchards and there was some kind of accident or something and they've lost beehives that way, weather, things like that. So that's kind of why we chose this kit. And also we're a good area for bees, as you've obviously probably seen them, but we're going to talk about a little bit different bee. We're going to focus on the mason bee, and I'll also mention some information about some leaf cutter bees. So we're going to start with the bottle. I want you to be very careful because, obviously scissors and plastic and your hands, you need to be careful. You're going to want to look at the width of your paper because that's going to help you decide where to cut. So your mason tubes, when you put them in, might be at different lengths, but the main tube right here, if you would measure from there, so that's going to be about where you're going to want to start your cutting. Now, you're also going to want to cut this at an angle, and let me show you on the one we've already done. I've got it a little bit higher here. You may even want it more. That's going to help keep some of the rain and things like that out, and it just offers more protection for the bees. And also for your tubes, since we're doing them out of paper. Now you can buy tubes pre-made, and you can also make tubes out of different reeds and things like that, but to get the quantity you would need and the right size and so forth, for us, for this practicality, it was easier to do the paper. Also, if you decide to harvest, which I'll explain later, the paper is one of the easiest ways to do that. So we're gonna measure with our paper to kind of get an idea of where to start. So I'm going to start around here. So I may have to use my scissors kind of open to get it started. And the bottle is going to bend a little, but that's okay. We can always pop it back into place. So this bottle is really, really soft. So I'm going to try a little. Let me try the other end of the scissors. Sometimes one end is a little bit sharper than the other. And these are the scissors I use all the time. There we go. Okay, so I've got a little, pop this back. So I've got a little slit. And so then I'm just going to use my scissors to cut like I would anything else. Again, I'm going to cut kind of at an angle and kind of curve it a little so that I have a little bit of an overhang. And it's not going going to be perfect because nobody cuts a perfect circle anyway, let alone on something that's round and stiff. And it's going to maybe give you a little trouble. Also, there's going to be some rough edges, so just be careful that you don't scratch yourself. So this one I did a much bigger overhang, and I may trim that just a little. It might be a little too much. The overhang also might help too with some of the wind, and wind and rain here can be pretty bad during the summer and the spring. So this part is just going to go in the trash, and that's going to be your mason bee home. Now you could take, if you really wanted to get some of these edges off, you can trim it a little more. You also could use like a little bit of sandpaper, a real fine grit, to get some of these edges a little smoother if that's what you wanted. But that's totally up to you. You also will have some leftover clay, so you could even, you know, put some kind of edging around it or something if you wanted, because you are going to have some leftover clay. So just to let you know, while you're working on that, there are about 4,000 species of bees that are native to North America. There's mainly two kingdoms of bees, social bees and solitary bees. Social bees are only about 10% of bees, which is going to be your honeybees who have a queen and a hive and so forth. Solitary bees, like the mesa bee we're going to talk about, and that we're focusing on, is a solitary bee. So you don't have to have large quantities. They work by themselves, and they do all the jobs. So instead of having one bee that does this job and one bee that does another job, the solitary bees do them all. So we'll talk about why that might be a good thing. Also, solitary bees can be attracted from other areas in the wild. So you can actually get the bees to, or mason bees can come to your yard from another yard or from nearby. So, and they can expand that way. So now to attach your bee house, you might need some help. But what I would recommend, because we've looked at different ways, because you don't want it rocking, the bees don't like that, and with some of the wind and rain we get, it can get quite bad. So what I would suggest is using a screwdriver and putting screws through the bottom into whatever you're going to post it to. And I would use, you know, the little round areas that are flatter where it stands normally. I would put the screws in those. How many you do and how stable you want it is up to you. And you want to place it at about eye level, maybe even a little bit lower. For those of you who are taller, I'm not too tall, so. And the other thing you want to think about is your location. So the bees like to kind of wake up to the warm sun. As soon as they get warm, that's when they start working. So what you want to do is, in order to give them the max amount of time to do their thing throughout the day, you want to put this kind of where there's morning sun, but they don't like the super direct sun in the afternoon. So you want somewhere that's going to get shady later in the day. You're also going to want to think about if you've recently trimmed trees or anything like that, if it's, you know, it could have been a place that you think of as shade, and now that you've trimmed the trees, it's not going to be some shade. So just think about that, because they don't like the hottest part of the day to be in the sun. So you'll want to think about that when you're picking your location. Okay, so next we're going to do the tubes. This is the fun part and the messy part that you'll probably enjoy. So you're going to start with just one of your pieces of paper and your dowel. And let me move this so you can see a little better. So what you're going to do is just kind of put like a line of glue. And because I'm using liquid, it's a little, you know, I just put a really, really thin line. You don't have to do much of all. And you're going to put your dowel a little more than halfway down the paper. So you'll see like my largest part is up here and then my smaller part is here, but you do want to have some overlap. And you're going to roll the paper over the dowel, and I like to try and look at the sides to make sure it's lined up. And then it helps me if I kind of do, and I have nails since I'm a girl, but some people don't, but you just kind of want to put a little crease in there because it'll help you from having it bubble up. And then you're just going to roll it. And as you roll it, and it's going to be a pretty tight roll, and as you roll it, you're going to kind of watch those edges to see if they're lining up. If we had to, we could trim them. It's not that big a deal. And then you're just going to roll it into that glue. And here's the part where it gets a little messy. So I keep rolling. So that means the glue is going to get on a couple little places. And I'm going to use my fingers to kind of make sure that glue is on there real good. So you can see it's glued down. That's where my seam is, right there. And I kind of make sure I don't get any on the stick. I'm wipe my hand a little because otherwise my next piece of paper is going to stick to my fingers and that mat. And then, as long as you didn't get any massive amounts of glues on the stick, you should be able to slide that right off and put it to the side. So let me do another one so you can see. And I do think a glue stick would work or something else would work. I just chose to do the Elmer's because I knew it would stick better, and I also know it doesn't take a super long time to dry. If you have a quick dry, really quick dry glue, you may want to start rolling first and then kind of pause to put your glue. So again, I'm just going to line it up so it's a little more than halfway down. I'm going to line up the sides, and I kind of do a crease like this. And then I'm going to roll it. Now, the dowel is for the size for mason bees because this is the size they like. And we also did cut the paper at 6 inches because that, again, is the size they like as far as the length of the tube. So different bees have different things that they like. A leaf cutter bee uses a little bit smaller holes. So if you want to try and attract leaf cutter bees either at another time or you want to try and do some at the same time, you could even mix up your tubes. So you could do different size ones. You could do one around a pencil, you can do one around the dowel. Honeybees are a little different since they don't use the tubes. So you're gonna let these dry for quite a while. I went ahead and let mine dry overnight. You could do it for that long or you could do it for a shorter time. So while you continue to make some of those, I'm just gonna, again, give you some more bee facts. Just to let you know, part of the reason that I personally like mason bees is number one, they are about the size of an average housefly. So I like that they're a little bit smaller. I'm not a big insect person. Also, the male mason bees do not have stingers at all. And the females are not, because they're not really territorial and protecting other bees, they are not going to be as aggressive. So you won't have them coming after you if you come near the bee house or anything like that. And most of the time you could be right up against them, and the only time you're gonna get stung really is if you were specifically like handling one, squeezing it. If you step on one, you might get stung. Again, it would have to be a female. But also the sting would be very, very mild. It would be like a pinprick, so it wouldn't be as bad. And the mason bees do constantly, other than when they're working in their tubes, they're constantly moving. So just watching them can be actually kind of interesting. And mason bees have more of like a iridescent bluish greenish color. And you may even hear them refer to different names that kind of refer to their color. But yeah, they're not nearly as aggressive. You're not going to have swarms. You're not going to have the, territorial, don't come near this area with bees competing. They actually it's almost like an apartment complex. They can live next to each other in different tubes, keep doing their work, keep doing laying eggs and so forth. So I just want to let you know that that's another reason that this is a good choice for a bee, especially if you're going to have them in your yard around pets and kids, or if you sit out there a lot. This is not going to be a bee that is going to bother you and constantly flit around you. They really kind of do their job. They're very, more of a, I want to say a focused bee, but that doesn't sound quite right. Okay, so after you let those dry for, approximately a few hours or even overnight, which is what I did with the ones I made, you are going to do the next part. So mason bees, they need mud. And the reason is when they are laying their eggs, you'll have mud at the one tube. They like for one end to be closed, so we're just going to help them and go ahead and close that end. They would do it on their own, but we're going to go ahead and start that for them. And then what they do is they do their little eggs and cocoon type things. They start out as eggs, they change, and they eventually have a cocoon, and then they build another wall of mud. And then they have another egg and another wall of mud, So you need to have some kind of mud source nearby. Since we're only blocking the end, and this is not going to be something that they're actually using, we're going to use some air dry clay, but you're going to want to have some kind of mud nearby once you put up your house. The mud is shouldn't be too far away because they're going to carry it in their mandible back to the house. Something that doesn't have leaves or sand or pieces of bark, you want it to be kind of a real smooth kind of mud. And it needs to stay in the damp to wet range. You don't want it soupy because then it's just going to drip when they try to pick it up. But it does need to be pretty soft. One recommendation is to do just a small shovel-size hole, 20 to 100 feet from where you're keeping your house. Like I said, just something shovel size, maybe 9 inches by 9 inches. If you really wanted to, you also could do something almost like a bowl where you keep the mud in there. Again, just put it at ground level and they'll carry it up. So that's going to be one of your options. Now, this is what they call light air clay, which I had never used this before. It's going to feel very strange. It's kind of got a puffy, light, airy feel. Even when I felt the packaging, I was like, this is really light. But it works, and so we're gonna use that. You're just gonna take a small amount, and I made sure to kind of seal the bag, try to get some of the air out so it doesn't harden while it's in there. Again, you're gonna have some left over, so if you really wanted to do something around the edges of your bottle, you probably could. I hadn't done that and hadn't thought of that, but you could do that. So you're just gonna take it up, and you're gonna roll it in a ball, and you're gonna do it like a small cookie, or maybe a large cookie depending on how much you grabbed. And then these are ones where I already did one end, but I'm going to show you how I do them because these are already dry, so I don't have to worry about them getting bent up. And they're pretty stiff. You know, you can't really bend them easily, and they're pretty stiff. You can hear how hard they are. So you're just going to put them in there, and it'll come right up most of the time. Sometimes you might have to hold the Play-Doh, that's what I think of when I feel it. The clay still a little bit, but it's just gonna plug up that end. So you're just gonna keep doing that. Oh, that one didn't stick as well, so I'm gonna turn it a little, see if I can, there we go. So there you go. And you can always, like, if there's little pieces sticking up, you can. So again, you're gonna let those sit for a while and just let them dry out. You can see, like, that's pretty hard now. I can't really pull it, scratch it off with my fingernail. So that's going to plug up those holes so that they can get to work right away and they don't have to waste time doing that. I will say another reason that mason bees are so great, besides the fact that they're not aggressive, don't sting really, they are amazing. 99% of the flowers landed on by a mason bee will get pollinated. And they can pollinate approximately 2,000 per day as opposed to 15 a day that a honeybee does. That's a big difference, and especially if you did have crops, for instance, an orchard, or one thing that I didn't realize until I started studying mason bees that's really apparently is an issue in North America are almonds. So something like this that could go in and pollinate so much, spread your crop, you'll have much better crops. And for that reason, you may want to consider putting them near, and this is one of their favorites, are fruit and flowering trees. So apples, lemon tree, any kind of, that kind of thing. Also, or if you have like if you have a vegetable garden, you may want to put it near that because it would also help with what you're getting out of those, because again, the pollination helps you. They like to be within 300 feet of whatever they're pollinating. So if you put the house near a tree or plants or anything like that, flowering type plants or fruit or vegetables, they will fly to that, and as long as it's within approximately 300 feet. That is also why you are able to why you can attract wild solitary bees. So if a bee is working on that and they see that there's a house nearby, they will go to a new house. And then you also have cocoons, which you can harvest, which we'll talk about. So you can grow your bee population year by year. Obviously a fruit or flowering tree would be a little hard to help you out. So we have helped you out with a bee feed mix of flowers. I wouldn't suggest spreading these out as in a huge area, just because they like the flowers to kind of be clustered together. And you'll notice that with flowering trees, they're usually kind of in clusters. But yeah, so we've included these to help get you started. I will tell you, we are a little late in the season for mason bees. You still may get some because June is right in the time period where you stop seeing as many. So I'd love to see if you guys get some. If not, this is definitely something that you could take the tubes in or work on the tubes and put them out next year, or save the whole bottle and put it out next year. Usually the beginning of spring. They're early spring bees. So that's another reason different bees kind of have different timelines. So that's another reason they're a good bee, is because they are one of the earliest spring bees to do. So yeah, so we're gonna use the air dry clay, flatten it like a cookie, plug up one end. The other thing is that the bees actually, they kind of like to go back to where they were once they kind of pick a tube. One way you can help them identify that is by coloring. So we've done the clay on one end. You could actually color the end of the tube. I wouldn't recommend using wax, just because crayons, because of the wax, because of the smell. I don't know if it would keep the bees from coming. So I've got here like just some double tipped markers. So what you could do if you want to, and you could do this with watercolor paints also, but you could just put a little color on the ends to help them identify maybe which one they've been in. Again, this is not something you have to do. They will make a home, and they don't worry about, but like we said with the apartments, it's almost like having a different color doorway for each bee. So you could do that if you want, and you could even do like a little bit around the edge on the inside. And again, that's just kind of an identifier for the bee. It is, it's paper, so you don't, even if you do the watercolor, you don't want it to be too wet because you don't want to deteriorate the paper too much. But again, that's something you can add to it in order for some, to add some color. And then you can just put the bees, or put the tubes in the house, and they can be at different areas. You can have some that are farther back, some, that's fine. That also helps them differentiate some. So again, if you had the different colors, they could, pick out which ones they had previously been in. Now, you can actually share your bees with others. These bees are a little less picky about temperature and sunlight, and but they are like I said, an early spring bee. But once they get in your tubes, you could actually have 5 to 8 little egg cells per tube. And so we have a book that you can check out. It's called Mason Bee Revolution. There are also some great websites out there, but this is actually a really good book, and it actually talks to you about harvesting your cocoons. So what you can do is, in the fall, you can bring your tubes in. You would actually open them and take out the cocoons, and then you would put them, they tell you what kind of thing you might want to put them in, a box or basket or thing like that. And then once they start hatching, they'll just fly out, and you can actually put it near the house if you want them to be able to find the house easily. But they talk about when the time is to pull those cocoons, how to tell if anything is possibly has gotten in the tube that's not good for the cocoons, if they're not viable, which ones to throw out, which ones to keep. But also they can be stored in the fridge to kind of delay hatching them if we're having some warm days, like we can in February and March. So you could keep them in the fridge and then bring them out once it gets warmer, and it's going to stay warm. So this book is great for that kind of information. But because there's 5 per 8 per tube, and depending on the size of your area or your garden, or how much plant and tree material you have, you can share these bees. So you could give some of those cocoons to someone else, educate them on the mason bee and how productive it is. And especially someone who has a garden or fruit trees or something like that, this can really help them increase their, flowers, their fruit, all of that. So you could actually share once you get to the mason bee amount that you want, and you feel pretty, confident that you've got a regular amount of mason bees attending to your own yard. You could actually share the cocoons with other people. So it's kind of a neat way to kind of pass on your information and to share that with everybody. So you've got your mason bee house and you've got your tubes in here. Now, one thing that sometimes happens is if you leave this space empty, you'll have other things go in there. Like birds might try to make a nest, or you might have birds even sit in there and try and eat the bees and things like that. So one of the recommendations is to fill it with things like just sticks or wads of paper, things like that, just to keep them. Now you could fill this whole thing with tubes. This is just regular printer copier paper. So you could, get some more and fill it with more tubes. And you could fill this whole thing. You'd probably have a pretty big yard if you had them all filled. And obviously some may get damaged in rain or so forth. So, that would give you your bees more area to work. So that's how you do your bee house. And I can't wait to see. I hope you guys will share pictures on Facebook, Instagram if you start seeing the bees. Again, we're a little late in the season, so if you wanted to do smaller tubes, or if you just want to put them out and see what happens, you could get either mason bees or leaf cutter bees. Leaf cutter bees come a little later, and instead of packing with mud, they actually use pieces of leaves. So you could end up with that kind of bee if they're willing to work in this kind of house. Usually they go a little bit smaller, but that's just to let you know. So that's going to be your bee house. I'd love to see how you do, and it'd be interesting to see even next summer. If you get some this summer and then you put them out next summer, how is your garden, your flowers, and so forth to go. And I'd love to see, this is a mixed seed packet, so it'd be interesting to see what everybody's flowers look like also. And just to let you know, we're going to be having our next activity after this is going to be crocheting for animals. So we're going to teach you the basics of crocheting, how to start, how to do a basic single crochet stitch, and also how to end and finish your piece. You will probably, depending on how you want to do it, this is actually made from almost one full skein of yarn. So this would be good for a small dog or cat. So at the end of the summer, I will be taking this to the animal shelter. It could even be used to laying flat for a rabbit or something like that. I like doing just the single stitch for the animals because it's a real tight stitch. You don't have to worry about them getting claws or anything caught in there. And it's big enough that, it's not something they're gonna chew up and choke on. My dog has a little one that's smaller than this that he just kind of plays around with. He's a big dog and he has this tiny little blanket. He loves it. But so that's gonna be our next project. And so you will get a crochet hook, a skein of yarn, and we'll be taking the donations all summer. So if you start to do it and you enjoy it, you can go get a skein of yarn. Honestly, they have them at the Dollar Tree, and we'll talk about it in the next video how to do that. Get some more yarn and you can make some more, and I will take whatever is donated to the animal shelter at the end of the summer. But this is a great way to start learning to crochet, and it just is a nice basic crochet, and it gives something the animals. They could even, this yarn is washable, so they can toss it in the washer and dryer, and the animal could even take it with them to their new home once they're adopted. So and they always need blankets, and especially once the summer's over and it starts getting cooler, because some of those floors, they're concrete, things like that. So the dogs would, I think, dogs and cats would really enjoy this, and then smaller ones could even go to other animals. So I'm gonna end there, and I'm so glad you joined us for this Mason Bee activity. We are doing more activities that are the teen and adults together, things that we thought they both would enjoy. So again, we'll be doing the crochet for animals, and we've got future stuff on our website where you can register ahead of time, and then you can come that week, pick up your little kit of materials, and we'll also be doing some fun stuff later in the year. Or later in the summer, we'll be doing some games and things like that. So thank you for joining us. I hope you've learned some about Mason bees, and again, we've got some Mason bee books and things about bees and just fun reads. So thank you for joining us.